All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're hoping some more will be coming in, but we realize I need it for the people on Zoom. This is just a mirage for you all. You're welcome. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Suzanne Stapleton. I'm one of the members here at UCG. I'm a member of the Racial Justice Committee. And on behalf of the Racial Justice Committee and the Seminar Committee, we are really happy to be hosting Veronica Robleto, who is the director and legal navigator for the Human Rights Coalition of Alachua County. I met Veronica just recently, a couple of months ago. I've started volunteering with their group and was really impressed with the impact and care they take to support immigrants in particular in our community. And one of the things I've seen is that I understand, and she'll explain more about this, is that one of the programs that they're involved in, the Community ID program, really grew out of the sanctuary movement, and the UCG was a member of the sanctuary movement a number of years ago, and they found through that project that members of our community often are denied access to public services because they cannot provide a state issued identification. And so they came up with the first program in the state to offer a community ID, which enabled people to access public services. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that along with many other programs from Veronica this morning. So really let's give a warm welcome to Veronica, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today, and thank you for that introduction. As Suzanne mentioned, I am the program director and legal navigator for the Human Rights Coalition of Alachua County, and I will try, so I know we got started a little late. I will try to be I'll move through the points as much as I can. There's a lot that we're doing and a lot that I'd like to share with you, so I will do my best. But I'll just go ahead and start by saying, so HRC, the Human Rights Coalition of Alachua County, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that, as she said, started out of the sanctuary movement here locally in the early part of 2017, just after the Trump election, where the community was nervous for a lot of reasons, and we're kind of in a similar place again at our state level, but particularly in regards to our immigrant community and neighbors, people came together to talk about how can we help keep our neighbors safe. And can I go for it? Okay, sorry. All right. Sorry, before I go into that, we really are founded in collective action, right? Working in coalition. So we are a coalition, but we are also part of larger coalitions as well, partnering together with community members, but really looking at tangible ways that we can address some issues in our community. Okay, so as I was saying, Westminster Presbyterian and Larry Green, who was the pastor back then, came together to create a sanctuary church and this idea of sanctuary movement. Have you all heard of the sanctuary movement before? Okay, so you're familiar. So what's that? You're part of it. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, so the sanctuary movement is all about protecting someone or a family that's facing imminent danger of deportation, because churches are one of the identified locations by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as protected areas. What that means is they are not supposed to be operating their immigration enforcement actions unless, of course, it's like a terroristic threat or something like that. But otherwise, these areas are to be protected. So that includes churches, that includes medical centers, that includes schools, that also includes court, but when someone is looking for a protection from domestic violence or other type of violence. So churches, and not just in Florida, throughout the country, have come together to say, okay, we are going to use this designation to help protect community members so that they can fight their case in court and try to be able to have a chance at staying here in the country. And so at Westminster, they were able to house one young man who is gay, and he's a student, and at the time at UF and from a Middle Eastern country. And somehow his father, who was a prominent figure in the government, got wind of his sexual orientation, and needless to say, was not very pleased, and came to the US to basically get him, to bring him home, to, fix him. I don't know, whatever the idea was, but he was in great fear that his life was in danger, not to mention just being oppressed and not be able to, be his true self. I'm happy to report that a few years later, or about a year later, he did win his asylum case. So he has gained asylum and is still in our community. All right. So one of our key partners that's very important is a group called Madres Sin Fronteras, or Mothers Without Borders. This is a grassroots immigrant-led group here in Gainesville that came together around the same time in 2016 to really talk about how can we prepare rather than fear. So that's their motto, which I love. And it's being prepared rather than fearful. Because back then when, people were feeling very fearful, and now when similarly people are feeling fearful, some things we can't control, but we know we can come together and be prepared for worst case scenario and help protect each other. So out of this group came an urgent need for, as Suzanne mentioned, local photo identification with a local address for people who have barriers to accessing state-issued ID. So the requirements for a driver's license is different in every state. In our state, certain categories of immigrants are not eligible to get a driver's license, right? Or a state-issued ID. It's not the same in every state. And the community was saying, we need this ID. We need this ID so that we can identify ourselves at our children's schools, so that we can get our utilities turned on, and for many other reasons that we've been learning throughout the years in this process. So HRC partnered with a national model for community ID, which is Faith Action International House. So they're out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And they are kind of like the national model that many or most of the community ID programs that exist now are modeled after. And they kind of have a model of, what is the process of the documents that you require, because we have a rigorous process as well. And their motto is turning strangers into neighbors. Because we think of a photo ID, well, how important is that? It's a piece of plastic. But not only is it about having this identification to prove you are who you say you are, but it's also about being part of the community and showing that not only you are who you say you are, but that you live in this community and you're a member of this community. So many of our immigrant neighbors have, so Faith Action as a network has provided, and this number has grown because this number is a little outdated, 30,000 IDs throughout the country. So Florida now has, in addition to our program, which was the first in the state, there's 3 other programs as well. And there are programs throughout the country in North Carolina, as far as the Midwest, I believe in Ohio, and Washington State. And they're all kind of based on the same idea. In addition to immigrants, there's other groups of neighbors that face barriers that are not immigrants necessarily, are US citizens as well. And that includes people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. You can't get a state ID without a permanent address. So no matter what your citizenship status is. Elderly individuals, that might be seasonal elders that might not want to try to get a license in both states, or might have limitation to documentation. People returning from incarceration, this is a big one as well. And so others that believe in a diverse community, that's part of why I'm here with you all today, is because part of the model is to encourage community members that aren't experiencing that critical need to also get a community ID and use it everywhere you can to help support the program, but also help destigmatize those that need the ID, right? So we don't want the ID to be some sort of clue that, oh, you must be undocumented or you must be homeless, right? So that is a really big part of the program. So I already mentioned these points. So everyone that comes to us to get a community ID has to go through an orientation. Prior to COVID, it was in person, kind of like we are today. People would come, we would do the orientation, and then folks would filter through the ID process. Once COVID hit, the community ID program kind of stopped for a few months, and then slowly reorganized the process where we have an orientation online. That's a YouTube video. And so we want people to be very clear, not only about what the ID is, where it came from, but also what it's not, right? So it's not a government issued ID. It's not a license to drive. It's not going to give you the right to vote if you don't already have it. It's not going to get you out of legal trouble. And it doesn't impact immigration status, neither positively nor negatively. So part of the model of the community IDs is that you advocate to get the city and or county government to actually pass a resolution recognizing it as valid photo identification for local use. So in our area, we got the city commission and the county commission to both pass their own resolutions recognizing the community ID. Under the city commission falls GPD, right? Because the chief is appointed by the commission, so they are kind of dictated by what the commission says. Law enforcement is a huge kind of part of this, the objective of the community ID, because we know that immigrants as well as other marginalized groups experience, hesitation and fear around accessing law enforcement for good reason, right? For a lot of historical things that have happened. So part of the community ID, and especially getting the local law enforcement to recognize it, is to help bridge that gap so that individuals, especially undocumented immigrants, can feel safe to call law enforcement without fear that they're going to be turned over to immigration and customs enforcement. GRU is another big one, getting your utilities turned on so people can use our ID for that. And then the county, the library, you can get a library card. The sheriff's office is its own entity, right? It's part of the county, but the sheriff is his own constitutional officer or elected official. So we had to advocate and get the sheriff separately to formally recognize the ID, which we finally were able to do. A little side note about that, though. If you've seen, Clovis Watson has resigned, and our governor has appointed someone to be there in the interim until the next election. So we are planning to meet with the new sheriff once he's in place to hopefully, continue the recognition, but we're also a little bit bracing ourselves to see what that conversation is going to look like. So UF Health and Shands, they were one of our first partners, and that was huge because the community, when talking about the urgent need, healthcare was a huge part of where people felt like they needed a local ID with a local address. So UF Health Shands, the mobile outreach clinic, equal access clinics. I don't want to call you out too much, but Michelle back here, who has been an amazing partner with the mobile outreach clinic. It's been so great to work together and see a full circle. Some of our volunteers also volunteer in these two programs. And I was told recently by one of the students that it was really awesome to see someone who had gotten their community ID using it in the equal access clinic. And then the part that you can't see below here, it says the school district, and what it says there is that it's on hold right now. So they were one of our first strong partners as well. But in the last year, and I believe it's a combination of different administration, just different staff moving through, but the superintendent kind of questioned, well, wait a minute, what is this community ID? And maybe they didn't know about it. So we've been in discussions with them because at this point in time, they've kind of backtracked a bit on their official recognition, saying that they need to have their legal office look over it because they're not sure, they're tasked with children's safety. But as I explained to the attorney at the time, which now there's a new one, that, many people who access our ID are new arrivals to our country, right? We have a lot of new arrivals coming into Gainesville, if you don't know that already. And a lot of these new arrivals have presented themselves at the southern border seeking asylum. And that is internationally and nationally known as a valid process to seek asylum, presenting yourself physically to a border. But when you do that, Border Patrol confiscates your documents, confiscates your passport until your case is concluded. And so in an asylum case, that can be 5+ years, right? And in the meantime, you have this stack of papers that Border Patrol gave you, and that's all you have. And so we are able to use those documents, in addition to some others, to help those folks get a community ID. Right? So my question to the school district is, what is your solution for those individuals, right? And we did, just one more note about the school district, in the beginning, have them test our ID through what they call the Raptor system, which is the system that they scan IDs when you go to pick up your kids, go on a field trip, anything. And that runs the individual through the sexual offender database to, check to make sure that they're not in any of those databases. So we're still pushing on that, and we would love your support. There's actually a petition that is wider, not only about the community ID, but about some families that have been experiencing some difficulties within the school and accessing information in their language. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end about it. But if you're willing to sign the letter, we're meeting with the school assistant superintendent in early October, and we're hoping to have some results. But if not, we're going to have these signatures to say the community cares about these families. All right, I already mentioned that we were the first in Florida. We were the only program to start without funding. So something I am going to talk a lot about is our funding. So we recognize Alachua County is a lot different than a lot of the other counties, especially the southern counties, as far as size and budget. And for HRC, it was important to get the program started. We didn't want funding to be a barrier, right? So our program has been volunteer run from the beginning, which the first ID drive was in December 2018, until June of 2022, when I was hired as the first full-time employee as the program director. But the rest of the counties, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, that now have programs, their process was, when they got the resolution passed, it was coupled with funding for the program. And so the model is that it's a nonprofit organization that runs the program with government recognition and funding. And part of that reason, especially in Florida, is to protect the individuals that get our community ID. If it was an actual county issued ID, then they would be subject to sunshine law, which would open up those records to the public. So it's really important, the model where it's a local nonprofit and then some funding from the government. So in Broward County, it's Broward County Legal Aid, and same in Palm Beach County, it's their legal aid organization running the program. Miami-Dade, it's a larger nonprofit called Branches. And then Orange County, even though we've experienced a little bit of a hiccup with the last legislative session, where part of the big anti-immigrant package, SB 1718, includes prohibiting local governments, cities and counties from funding community ID programs. Luckily, it did not talk about invalidating them, right? And so Orange County, even with that hiccup of them not being able to provide funding, they are still working on their county staff. We've been in touch with them. They're still going forward with a community ID program in that area, because these programs have been successful, and we've had record numbers come out to get the IDs because it's working, right? It's helping people access healthcare, get housing, identify themselves to law enforcement. So I'm happy to say nobody's closing their doors, but we definitely are experiencing some challenges with funding. Okay, before I get into the other services, I'm trying to be aware of time. Does anyone have any questions about this so far? Yes? Oh, hold on one second, sorry. Yes.
Age limit For the ID, so is there an age limit?
Yeah, we start at age 12 and up.
I saw that the outreach and equal access clinics are open to people with these IDs. What about the rest of Shands?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Whoa.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I'm going to keep going in interest of time. Other services that we provide as part of HRC, we do have an immigrant helpline, which started back when the ID program was starting. It was kind of thought of more of a rapid response type of hotline. Over the years, luckily, there haven't been the amount of ICE enforcement actions locally as we thought there could be. So it's kind of evolved into more of a connector to local immigrants in getting information and connecting them to local services, and also making appointments to get the ID. Legal navigator, excuse me, is myself. So my background prior to being in this position, I was a paralegal and an outreach paralegal at UF. There was an immigration clinic there and a domestic violence clinic, and then at a legal nonprofit. And so the legal navigation services, I always preface when I speak with individuals in the community, I'm not a licensed attorney, but with my experience, I can inform individuals of their rights and responsibilities within certain legal contexts. So let me give you an example. I often get calls from people who are dealing with a driving without a license charge, because that's probably the top criminal charge that I see in the immigrant community due to the same barriers that I already mentioned, that people are not eligible to get a license, but due to necessity, they end up driving their kids to school, to work. And so I receive a call from a woman who says, my husband was arrested. He's at the Alachua County Jail. I don't know what to do, what's going to happen. So I explain how she can set up an account, a Securus account, so that she can communicate and make phone calls to her loved one. I also let her know to let him know that he has a right to an interpreter in any criminal proceeding, and that they have to provide that interpreter. And that if they are proposing jail time, he also has a right to a public defender, regardless of his immigration status, right? And so that's kind of the sort of the types of help that I can get people. Another like kind of good anecdote, I think, is a gentleman who called who had a court date. He wasn't in jail, but he had a court date for driving without a license. And he said, oh my gosh, I just realized I missed my court date because I thought it was April 5th, but it's May 4th. Do you know why? Because in Latin America and probably lots of other countries, they write the date differently. They write the day first, then the month, then the year, right? So he was panicked because there was a warrant out for his arrest for failure to appear, right? So we did a three-way call to the clerk of court. He was not an English speaker, so he had to get interpretation assistance, and we were able to communicate to the judge and get his court date changed so that he could avoid arrest. And that's a big deal for him, not only because, of course, he doesn't want to be arrested, but because he was undocumented or is undocumented. Getting arrested could also mean getting transferred to ICE detention, and then also being separated from your family, right? So this is the type of kind of services that we provided through that. Accompaniment, and we're actually looking for more help with accompaniment, but we have to be careful that it's trusted individuals, right? So if we don't know you, but you come through someone who is a trusted individual, or if you've been a volunteer with us for some time, you can help with accompaniment, which is a program where we pair volunteers with local immigrants who need to go to immigration court. Immigration court is in Orlando, for anyone north of Orlando. And if you don't have a license, so you can't drive to immigration court. And let me tell you, there are a lot of people who take advantage of this and charge up to $500 for that drive from Gainesville to Orlando and back. And some of them are churches also, sad to say. And then also accompanying, I've heard of some local churches where they have this service, but it's like $200 to drive someone that they have to pay. Also to ICE check-in. So if someone came through the border in the way that I mentioned before, seeking asylum, in the meantime, they are undocumented, right? But until they get their case approved, and they also often have to go to Jacksonville or Orlando to check in with ICE. It's kind of like probation, but for immigration. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Oops. It's not. Oh. Oh, there's Mary. So Mary's been volunteering with us as a notary. All right, so this is just some figures of what we've been able to do from going from no funding to funding, right? Since we were awarded some ARPA funds, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, it's COVID-related funding, and the reason we were eligible is because of the barriers people experience to COVID vaccines and testing because of lack of identification. We've been able to host 30 drives, ID drives, issued 793 IDs, which is more than half of our total IDs since the end of 2018, right? Like I said, we had a big pause during COVID, but still we've really been able to help a lot more people. We've provided legal navigation for 204 individuals and accompaniment for 30. And our volunteers are amazing. Let me tell you, I am so grateful and humbled by our volunteers. So every ID drive we have usually about 2 a month. There's between 8 and 10 volunteers that help us out for 2 hours to do that process. And what I've noticed is that people come back because they feel good about helping people. We don't have to beg people to come back and volunteer for us. And all kinds of people volunteer with us, and some of the volunteers are immigrants themselves who have a personal story and who have been impacted either themselves or their family members. All right, and so we've also worked with a lot of community partners, and we continue to make more partnerships. We've partnered with Grace Marketplace. So I mentioned before about people experiencing housing insecurity. If an individual is receiving services at Grace, excuse me, they can use their service letter. It's like a letter on letterhead that says this person's receiving services there and can receive mail there. We can use that as the proof of address. And we've also had ID drives at Grace to also make it even more accessible for those individuals. And we've heard back from some of their caseworkers that getting the ID was able, one woman was able to get into housing where that was the only barrier, that she didn't have any ID. Another gentleman was able to get into substance abuse treatment. We've been doing exit surveys recently to hear back from the community on how it's been working for them. And we have been hearing from some foreign-born neighbors about some positive experiences they've had with accessing law enforcement and feeling a different sense of respect when they can show the local ID. Partnership for Strong Families has I believe it's yearly event for those re-entering from incarceration. So we've participated with them twice now and helped some individuals get the ID to help them just set up and, get their life back together. One young man needed it to register for classes at Santa Fe, for example. And then the Swag Family Resource Center, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that. It's a Southwest advocacy group. They actually reached out to us because they have kind of like a slow trickle of people they serve that have barriers to state ID. So just last week, I'll do an individual service if there's like an urgency for a specific reason. And I helped a young man who needed the ID to access utility assistance. There was like a program where they were going to help 200 people one day with utility assistance, and he needed an ID. All right, this is a video that's 2 minutes long. We're close to the end of my presentation. And this is end of last year, documentary filmmaker. We were able to get a small grant for him to make this 2-minute video, which are members of Madres Sin Fronteras talking about the community ID and how it has positively impacted them. So I think we're going to be able to watch this. Also, while you're getting that going, I will just say SB 1718, have you all heard of this before I mentioned it? Okay, so This is oh, if you're ready. Oh, should I move out of your way? So it's I've heard that it's one of the harshest anti-immigrant law that's been passed in our country. And it includes many different aspects. One, though, is specifically targeting community ID programs. And I believe it's because of the people that we help, right? And so it prohibits local cities and counties from funding any individual or entity that provides a photo identification without asking for proof of immigration status, basically. And so we really wrestled with, like, what are we going to do? But we were not about to start asking, right? So, because that was part of the reason we started, right? Is that was not part of what our process is at all. We do ask for proof of identity, age, and address. And we're rigorous with that process, but we weren't about to change that. But is it ready? Okay.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es María Venegas. Estoy agradecida por el apoyo que nos dieron para lograr conseguir esta identificación.
Blocked by where it says the screen saving. I don't know if that's able to be moved at all. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's probably fine. Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es María Venegas. Estoy agradecida por el apoyo que nos dieron para lograr conseguir esta identificación. Ya que nosotros no tenemos una ID especial de aquí y esto nos ha servido mucho, especial para las escuelas y principalmente con la policía. Yo tuve un pequeño problema con alguien y fui y me la tomaron en cuenta sin poner alguna excusa de que pusiera otra identificación.
Hola, mi nombre es Roxana Aguilar. Quiero darle gracias al Grupo de Madres Sin Fronteras por haberme ayudado a poder obtener una identificación comunitaria, y ya que con esta identificación yo he podido entrar al hospital porque tuve una emergencia, estuve hospitalizada y me sirvió de mucho. Me siento a gusto por haberme identificado como residente del condado de Alachua.
Hola, mi nombre es Dominga. Esta identificación me ha servido para identificarme en la escuela de mi hijo cuando lo he ido a recoger en el condado de Alachua.
La verdad me siento más segura de poder caminar con este ID. Nos ayuda a identificarnos y sobre todo saber quiénes somos, y nos ayuda sobre todo a la familia y a toda la comunidad. Personalmente me ayuda bastante.
Es muy bueno porque se ha extendido a muchos otros estados, a otros lugares, y que la sigan sacando, pues, que sigamos de pies en la lucha de Madres Sin Frontera, no quedarnos en el limbo, escondidos, salir a flote todo lo que hacemos como inmigrantes, darnos a conocer para que tengamos más apoyo sobre la comunidad.
¡Otro golpe!
Those are amazing women that we've, yes, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
There's an expiration date on the call. How long will it last?
It's good for 2 years, and then you can come and renew it. And we have seen people renew, so that's always a good sign that it's been helpful and useful for them. Another, just a little anecdote about, because I feel like I learn every day more places that people are able to use it and that it's helpful for them. One recently was a single mom, an immigrant, who was really needing to urgently renew. And I asked her why, and she said it's at the food bank. The local food bank wanted to see an ID with a local address that was valid and not expired. So she was urgently needing that. Okay, okay, before we get into questions, okay, I was gonna say, I thought we had another one. Okay, So quickly, this is my last slide, and I have more to say and want open to questions, but I know that it's also 12:04 and you usually get started earlier, so I want to be respectful of people's time. I'm happy to, stay and talk as long as we need to, but okay, I just want to say that. All right, so responding to community needs is another big one, right? So I've talked to you about the different programs that we have, but we are always working in coalition with other organizations and just listening to our community and seeing what is needed. During this last legislative session, it was a hard session for a lot of people. A lot of our community members, including myself, felt attacked, right? And targeted and unsafe, and people left. Like, a lot of people left Florida. Immigrants in particular, undocumented immigrants, LGBTQIA individuals, people were feeling unsafe and still feel unsafe. So we put together some community protection events. Suzanne helped us at a few of them. And what that involved, in particular for the immigrant community, was preparing power of attorney documents. We had volunteer notaries that helped us out. And so it was a power of attorney for temporary care of minor children. So this is part of a family emergency safety plan around the threat of deportation. So for undocumented parents or really immigrants that are documented, if you get arrested, they call ICE, and ICE can pick you up. I know of permanent residents that end up in ICE detention having to fight against deportation, right? So immigrant parents through this document can name ahead of time a trusted adult that with that power of attorney can pick up the kids from school, take them to get medical care, authorize any kind of permission at the school or medical care. It's really focused on school and medical, and also just care for them in their home, right? And so we were helping families fill these out. We helped over 50 families fill these out as a preventive measure. If they were to get detained or deported, at least there was a plan in place for their children. And we continue to do that as well. This photograph is a legal information event that we held, informing the community about the law, but also about some immigration topics. We've partnered with Juan Caballero. He's the new the director of the immigration clinic at UF. Law school, and then his wife actually is a public defender, and they're both in a couple of weeks we're going to host another event that's completely in Spanish for the Spanish-speaking immigrant community to talk about this new law, but also to talk about some immigration topics and just information about knowing your rights when interacting with law enforcement. Because another part of this whole SB 1718 has to do what they put out there as human trafficking, but it's really targeting undocumented people in our community. So the wonderful play that we got to see today during service, they referred to the Fugitive Slave Act of 18 something. They took some of the language from that law and put it into 1718, because one aspect that thankfully, I think from hard work and advocacy was not in the end included, they took it out, involved having it be a felony to transport an individual within Florida that you knew or should have known was undocumented. And so we were really worried because our accompaniment program, I was like, oh my gosh, are our volunteers going to be risking felonies now, giving people rides to court, right? So thankfully that part was taken out, the part about within, but there's still, and Southern Poverty Law Center and Florida ACLU is currently challenging this in court, Section 10, I think it is, and that's changed Florida statute from before what human trafficking was bringing someone into Florida in the process of entering unlawfully. So someone comes to the border, someone picks them up, they're bringing them in, right? Now it is at any time transporting someone from anywhere else, another state, by car, boat, plane, whatever, into Florida that you know or should have known ever entered the country unlawfully. So the first arrest happened already last week. A car full of, I believe, 5 or 6 construction workers, men that were coming from Georgia back into Florida. The police pulled them over for speeding 10 miles over the speed limit on the highway. And the driver gave his Mexican passport. He didn't have a license, so they called ICE. All the rest of the passengers, unfortunately, gave their name and their IDs as well. And they were able to verify that everyone was undocumented. So the driver is facing up to 25 years in prison right now. Yeah, so we think it's urgent to inform people to really, it's scary and it's hard to do in the moment. But if those passengers would have exercised their right to remain silent and not handed over any documentation, it would have made it a lot harder for the law enforcement agency to say, why do we suspect that they're undocumented? Is it because they're brown? Right? Because how else do you suspect someone's undocumented, right? And so we're holding one of those events in a couple of weeks for the community as well. And so we, on Friday, had a kickoff event for our fundraising campaign. That's one thing I want to tell you all about, because the city, they stopped funding us before the law even passed. They were like, we can't, I'm sorry. They had, I guess it's a combination of a lot of eyes on our city as well from the state level. So they kind of just didn't want to deal with it. The county, thankfully, we were able to amend our contract. We do have like a 2-year contract with them that we were able to amend for them to still provide funding for everything but the community ID. Excuse me, so the hotline, the legal navigation, the accompaniment, the outreach. So we calculated the deficit for this year is $20,000. And we just launched our fundraising campaign. We had an awesome event. I felt so grateful on Friday. And we, between our cash donations and online, we're up to around 3,000, which I feel like is pretty good out of our 20,000 goal. We're hoping to reach that within 2 months. So I do want to pass around, if anyone is so willing today, this has a few QR codes on it that are, one is just to learn more, to sign up to volunteer, but the bottom right one is to make a donation. So if you're willing to, I'm going to go ahead and pass that around to make a donation. Yes?
I just want to be sure we let everyone know we're doing an ID drive.
Yes. Yes.
Because of time.
Okay, let me talk about that really quick. Okay, so let me just really quickly tell you also that, yes, part of helping our program is to get an ID yourself. And this seminar today is to kind of get ready for next Sunday, where we're going to be set up in the courtyard right after service. And we're hoping to get as many people, as many of your congregation members to get their community ID. Not only, it's $10 a person. And not only just to financially support us, but again, like I said, to provide support and to help destigmatize the ID. Yes, thank you. So what you do need to bring is proof of identity, age, and address. The proof of age one is a weird, there's a Florida statute that is very specific about non-governmental entities that have IDs with your age on it. So your driver's license doesn't work for proof of age. Driver's license, I know. Driver's license works for proof of identity, but for proof of age, it has to be a passport or a birth certificate. Those are the 2 most common ones. So passport or birth certificate, I know, it's weird. Baptismal certificate, certificate of entry to the United States, which is back to the folks entering at the border. That's why we can use those government documents. Proof of address would need to be like a GRU bill, cable, phone, bank statement, some kind of official bill with your name and the address. For address as well, yeah. But you would, if you can't just bring your license, you would need to bring a birth certificate or a passport in addition to your license. You don't have to bring your utility bill if your license is current and your address is on there. Yeah, but you do need to bring the proof of age, if that makes sense. Passport or birth certificate. Right, so then you would use the ID. Sorry. And I'm sorry that it's going so late, but does anyone have any questions or comments or issues with anything I've shared with y'all today? Please spread the word to others that'll be here next Sunday about getting their community ID. It's pretty fast and easy if you have, your documents ready to go. So please encourage everyone that that will be here next week to have things ready. Yes. We didn't open it up to community just because we just were planning to have it here for UCG, but yeah.